Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a very special show for you today as we approach rapidly the holidays. Briahna, what are we discussing?
Well, Professor of Law Edward Lee joins us. We'll take a deep dive into the charges against former FTX leader Sam Bankman-Fried and what his defense could look like. Plus, one new member of Congress is facing accusations he lied on his resume. And more. We'll discuss that story later. But first, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky spoke before the U.S. Congress yesterday during his state visit to Washington, D.C., where he made the case that Americans can help, quote, speed up Ukrainian victory. Let's watch.
I believe there should be no taboos between us in our alliance. Ukraine never asked the American soldiers to fight on our land instead of us. I assure you that Ukrainian soldiers can perfectly operate American tanks and planes themselves. Financial assistance is also critically important, and I would like to thank you very much. Thank you for both financial packages you have already provided us with and the ones you may be willing to decide on. Your money is not charity. It's an investment in the global security and democracy that we handle in the most responsible way. And we will win because we are united, Ukraine, America, and the entire free world.
Yesterday, the Biden administration announced another $1.85 billion in aid for Ukraine's defensive effort, a symbol of the White House's, quote, enduring commitment to the people of Ukraine. According to Secretary of State Antony Blinken, $1 billion in Pentagon funding will be used to send artillery and equipment, including Patriot missiles. Those are the most advanced surface-to-air missile systems the West has provided to Ukraine to help repel Russian aerial attacks thus far. So what did you make of the official visit of Mr. Zelensky?
So just to that last point, just a month or so ago, we were talking about how the Biden administration was showing restraint by not sending certain long-range missiles because of the kinds of escalation that they could provoke. And now it seems like there's a complete about-face there. That's
They were
frustrating.
restraining themselves in giving them until they could do the photo op.
Apparently. So yeah, I mean, you call it a photo op. It's hard to resist that characterization when you've seen the full trajectory of the relationship between Zelensky, the White House, and the Western media. You know, there was the glamour spread in a fashion magazine where he was in front of kind of faux war background. He's, again, presented himself in a variation, I guess, the more formal version of his T-shirt ensemble to meet the president and to speak to Congress, the sweatshirt, long-sleeve version of his battle attire. There's a lot of references to him having come from the front lines as though he is himself a soldier fighting a war in a traditional sense. And, you know, it feels like all of that pageantry is intended to obscure the dissonance that I think a lot of people will feel seeing a foreign leader who has never before been a huge part of our public American discourse, standing before Congress with an American flag that looks like maybe it was signed by all the Congress members, hugging and kissing Nancy Pelosi, with Americans standing up across the aisle in a bipartisan way, clapping a kind of jingoistic call to infinite money and funding for a war where our interests are limited at best.
And there was nothing limited about Zelensky's remarks. Later when he spoke, or maybe it was before that, I'm not sure it was before or after, he spoke with Biden and he took questions and was asked about, you know, how he feels about Russia, et cetera. And he talks about the need for vengeance because the whole people are collectively guilty of waging this war, and Biden kind of cuts him off. That's a very totalizing, that's a mindset that will end up committing us, if we're committed, to so much more support. And look, I want to be a little careful here. I see a lot of, it's interesting, a lot of people in conservative media, a lot of people on the right could not stand this guy less. They don't want to go down this road anymore. Very disparaging of him, his attire, his visit, etc. look, I think it's possible to have some respect for a wartime leader who his country suffered invasion, but we have to be sober-minded about this situation and not just to watch our members of Congress like fangirl over this guy.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Are they making good decisions with our tax dollars? It's not their money.
Yeah.
They're not just like writing him checks out of their own pocketbooks. They're writing him checks out of your pocketbook. And how much more money are you, the American people, willing to commit to this? I don't think it's nearly as much as bipartisan leadership clearly thinks this. But maybe, I don't know, maybe the Democratic base really supports Ukraine as their personality and they support this? I don't know. I don't think the Republican base does
I
at
will
all.
say there were fewer than 100 House Republicans apparently at present. And people were also observing that I think Lauren Boebert wasn't standing up and applauding. I didn't get a chance to see camera close-ups on what the progressives were doing in this moment, but I'm a little afraid to look and find out, to be honest.
But McConnell said the other day, because he was interviewed about his support for the spending bill, he's like, no, we have everything we want because our top priority is supporting Ukraine. That's our top priority. He's speaking on behalf of the Republican Party and the conservative movement. I don't think that's where the conservative movement is at all, even close. I don't think it's anywhere close to their top priority. I think it's a debate whether it's a priority at all.
Well, speaking of someone who certainly channels the mood of many Republicans, conservatives, Fox News' Tucker Carlson had this to say about Zelensky's plea to Congress last night. Let's watch.
President of Ukraine arrived at the White House dressed like the manager of a strip club and started to demand money. Amazingly, no one threw him out and said they did whatever he wanted. American taxpayers declared Joe Biden will continue to give Zelensky whatever he demands for, quote, as long as it takes. Tellingly, Biden never specified what it is, as long as it takes to do what? Push the Russian army back to pre-invasion borders? Sounds reasonable. That's what most Americans likely assume, those who are still paying attention. But that is not what Zelensky means, and it is not what he is asking for. Zelensky is demanding regime change in Russia, just like in Iraq and Libya and a long list of other failed states, except this time in the heart of the Eurasian landmass, next door to the entire civilized world. That's what Zelensky has called for repeatedly, and every dollar we send to him goes toward that end.
Yeah, so here's the thing. I am not as invested in what Zelensky is wearing as Tucker Carlson is necessarily, but it is the unlimited fund, especially when you contrast the amount of spending that's going to Ukraine with the amounts that people object to when we're talking about spending on Americans. So we're about $100 billion into this Ukraine funding. And if you think back to the Build Back Better bill, which was derided not just by Republicans, but by a lot of blue dog conservative Democrats for being too much spending, for driving inflation, all of these things. You know, we're in the middle of a housing crisis. We spent $150 billion on housing issues in Build Back Better. Again, an easy, cool $100 billion to Ukraine. You know, if you go down the list, we spent a fraction, I think $35 billion on Medicare hearing, $100 billion to Ukraine. You know, and over and over and over again, the child care tax credit, which had taken 50% of American children out of poverty, that was so popular in conservative states that have a lot of low-income people in them, like West Virginia. Manchin, opposed to these sorts of things, cost $400 billion. Again, we are easy breezy willing to send $100 billion off to the other side of the world, but not spend that money keeping American children out of poverty. And you can't be surprised when Americans are upset about it.
I saw someone on Twitter pointing out that in 1940, when Winston Churchill came to the U.S. to ask for help from defending against an invasion, Nazi invasion, we gave him warships that we didn't need anymore in exchange for an agreement that we could have U.S. naval bases rent-free on a bunch of British island possessions all over the world. We got something out of this deal. And the analogy being like, what are we getting out of this? This is an endless commitment.
Yeah.
We're as much money as they need, no questions asked, no press for peace, in a much less perilous situation for the world. I mean, obviously, I don't think anyone wants Russia to occupy Ukraine or swallow the country or even swallow part of the country,
right.
but some territory that is already not fully under Ukrainian control, changing hands between Ukraine and Russia, is not even remotely the same as the Nazis conquering the UK. And we were a little more savvy in our negotiations then.
Well, regretfully, I think that there is stuff that America is getting in exchange, regardless of whether or not they're willing to be so open about it. And I do think that this kind of resurgent domino theory and desire to maintain U.S. economic hegemony in a monopolar world is what's at stake here. Now, they're not saying that, right? And so the question is the public being misled, being told this is about Ukrainian lives and Ukrainian children, Ukrainian freedom and humanitarian causes, when in fact it's about this economic world building project that the United States is on. And I think that's, if America wants to do that, it has to be honest with the American people about what its goals are and stop using literal Ukrainian human beings as a shield for their
Just ask
behavior.
the American people. McConnell asked Republican voters what they think about this. Think you would not hear the answer you apparently think you'd hear.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have more Rising right after this. Briahna's Radar is next. Stay tuned.